The Helldiver was developed as a replacement for the Douglas SBD Dauntless, and meant to be a much more advanced aircraft, but it was plagued with problems and delays, and even though eventually matured and turned out to be an effective aircraft, by the time it actually entered combat, it was overshadowed by other designs. So today we will see why this ambitious design failed to live up to the expectations, what were the problems in the development, we will take a look at its technical specifications, variants, and its combat use. The cooperation between the Navy and Curtiss started in the 1930s when Curtiss developed the SBC dive bomber series with the XSBC 1, 2 and 3 models between 1933 and 1935. These biplanes were the ancestors of the later Helldiver. In 1935, the XSBC-3 entered in a competition the Navy put out for new scout bombers. This competition invited both biplanes and monoplanes, and the XSBC-3 had to compete against the Great Lakes XB2G1 and the Grumman XSBF-1. From the competition, the Curtiss design came out as a winner and received a contract from the Navy. The production started in late 1936, and the first SBC-3 deliveries took place in July 1937. Though the Navy received the SBC-3 in 1937, they very soon became obsolete, as in the same competition in 1935, several monoplanes were tested as well, from which the Douglas SBD Dauntless was the winner, and received production orders in 1939 from both the Navy and from the Marine Corps. Not long ago I made a video about the Dauntless. If you want to know more about its history, I recommend you watch it. See the link in the description or at the end of this video. The Navy originally only saw the Dauntless as a stopgap solution. Already before it entered service, they issued again new specifications for a monoplane dive bomber. The specifications for the new plane were not easy to fulfill. The new plane had to be able to carry a big bomb load internally, carry numerous special equipment, but also be small enough to fit in the elevators on the carriers. The Navy was such in a hurry to get their new and modern dive bomber that they took a big gamble with it. Even before the first prototype flew, they ordered 370 units from Curtiss in November 1940. The first prototype made its maiden flight in December 1940, but crashed in February 1941 because of engine failure. Notice the prototype featured 2 machine guns in the engine cowlings, which was later moved in the wings. The rebuilt prototype received a longer fuselage and a larger tail, and flew again in October the same year. But only for a month, as in December in a dive test one of its wings failed and the plane crashed. Later during carrier trials it was found the landing gear was too bouncy, preventing tailhook engagement. If the tailhook did connect, sometimes the whole tail broke off from the aircraft. Other times the landing gear collapsed on landing. But that was only one of the problems with the plane. It had a dangerously high stall speed, instability. In the test several structural weaknesses were found. There were problems with the engines and the propellers too. To fulfill the specifications, the Helldiver had to be a much bigger aircraft than the Dauntless, and already at the beginning it was about 1,000 pounds heavier. Though it featured foldable wings to take up less space on the carriers, its length couldn't be less than the size of the elevators. It was only a bit less than 4 feet longer than the SBD, and being a much bigger and heavier plane, that meant its tail didn't have enough control. Especially true was this at low speeds, as below 90 knots the control response was very poor, but the landing speeds on the carriers were only about 85 knots. This meant the Helldiver was very difficult to control at one of the most dangerous parts of the flight, when landing on the carrier. Though the large-scale production was ordered already in November 1940, the countless problems during the trials resulted in months of delays, as the Navy requested 880 modifications on the plane. There were changes to the armament, increase in fuel capacity, improvements on the radars, and many more. The fact that there was a brand new plant built just to manufacture this plane, and setting up the production had its own hiccups, just led to further delays, resulting in the first production model only leaving the assembly line in June 1942, and the first ones arriving at their units in December. When they arrived on the carriers, again more faults were discovered. The tail wheels and hooks failed several times, and the plane's electrical systems and hydraulics had problems as well. The Helldivers were limited to serve as land-based aircraft until these were fixed, and they were only cleared for carrier use in May 1943. The Army also ordered around 3,000 from the ground-based version, the A-25 Shrike, which was manufactured without the folding wings or tailhook. But after so many problems with the plane, they only received 900 of them, before they decided they don't need a dedicated dive bomber, and cancelled the rest of the order. Now let's take a look at the Helldiver's specifications, compared to its predecessor, the SBD Dauntless. The Helldiver was a much bigger, and most importantly heavier aircraft than the Dauntless it was meant to replace. Its length was almost 37 feet, and its wingspan was almost 50 feet, so it was about 4 feet longer and 8 feet wider than the Dauntless. But it's the weight where the real difference was between the two planes. The production Helldiver's empty weight, after all the modifications, was almost 4,000 pounds more than the SBD's. Its empty weight of 10,500 pounds equaled the maximum takeoff weight of the Dauntless. To carry this much weight, the plane used the Wright R2620 radial air-cooled engine, producing 1,900 horsepower. That was about 60% more power than what the Dauntless had. The Helldiver had a maximum speed of 295 miles an hour at 16,700 feet, and it had a cruise speed of 158 miles an hour. Its range was 1,165 miles, which was actually less than the SBD's. But with its more powerful engine, it had a higher service ceiling at 29,100 feet. The plane's armament consisted of two 20mm cannons in the wings and two rear-firing 30 caliber machine guns. Optionally, the plane could carry gun pods under the wings, with two 50 caliber machine guns in each pod. In its internal bomb bay, it could carry a maximum of 2,000-pound bombs or one torpedo. Plus it could carry two additional 500-pound bombs under the wings. The SB2C1 was the first production model. It featured four 50 caliber machine guns in the wings and a single 30 caliber machine gun at the rear. 200 units were built. The SB2C1A was the original designation of the Army Air Corps version, which became the A-25 later. These were followed by the SB2C1C model, where they switched to two 20mm cannons from the four 50 caliber machine guns. 778 were made from this variant. The SB2C2 was a float plane version, which was planned to go to production but was cancelled. With the introduction of the SB2C3 model, the aircraft finally started to get a bit better reputation, as this model featured the new 1,900 horsepower engine and several other improvements. This model had a bigger production run than the earlier ones, with 1,112 units produced. The following SB2C4 model, arriving late 1944, received external hardpoints to mount bombs or rockets. This was the most produced model, with 2,045 made. The final production variant, the SB2C5, arrived early 1945 and featured increased fuel capacity, a new canopy, and some other modifications. 2,500 were ordered, but only 970 were built, as the rest were cancelled when the war ended. There was a planned SB2C6 version, fitted with a new 2,100 horsepower engine, but only two prototypes were built. The Helldivers first saw combat in November 1943. They were flying missions against Rabaul and sank two cruisers and a destroyer. Even when they entered service, the reception of the new plane was not very good amongst the pilots and carrier crews. The plane was difficult to maintain, harder to fly than the SBD, and the first version was underpowered with the original 1,500 horsepower engine. The SB2C3, which was delivered from early 1944, was the variant that showed real improvements and finally started to live up to the expectations. It featured the new 1,900 horsepower engine and four-bladed propellers, finally fixing the lack of power for this heavy plane. The Helldivers participated in most major operations in the Pacific during the second phase of the war. flying missions at the Marianas, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and attacks against the Japanese home islands. They also participated in sinking the giant Japanese battleship Yamato in April 1945. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Helldiver's shorter range than its predecessor, the Dauntless, led to a loss of more than 30 planes. After a long-range strike against Japanese carriers, from the 51 participating Helldivers, only 5 returned, but most of the planes lost was not to enemy fire. 32 of them had to ditch in the sea because they ran out of fuel. Towards the end of the war, the development of fighter planes and air-to-ground missiles made it clear the purpose-built dive bomber reached the end of its useful life. The new fighter planes could carry the same amount of payload and were much faster and more maneuverable. The A-25 variants delivered to the army never really had a place, as by that time other planes like the P-47 proved they worked as ground attackers and were much better at that role than a dedicated dive bomber. Almost half of them were transferred to the Marines, where they saw action near the end of the war, conducting bombing missions. The Helldivers stayed in service with the Navy until 1947. After that they were slowly decommissioned, with the last ones leaving service in 1950. After the war, the surplus Helldivers were sold to other countries, like France, Italy, and Greece. They participated in the Greek Civil War and in the Indochina War with the French Air Force. The Helldivers had a long and troublesome development time, and they only started to live up to the expectations around the end of the war. But after they matured, they did their part, flying more than 18,000 sorties on the Pacific and sinking more than 300 Japanese ships. Their reception was not very good when they entered service, but to be honest, they had big shoes to fill, as they were expected to replace the SBD Dauntless, the hero of Midway. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.